At a diner near a gas station, I met a man who introduced himself as Scar. He was huge, with a gruff demeanor and scars crisscrossing his face like a roadmap of violence. "You looking for work?" he asked, his voice as rough as the icy wind outside. I nodded, too exhausted to care about the warning signs. "Good. Follow me." The warehouse was unlike anything I had ever seen. It loomed in the distance, a massive structure surrounded by darkness and silence. Inside, it was just as eerie. Rows upon rows of crates, dimly lit corridors, and an oppressive sense of isolation. Scar showed me to a small room at the back, no bigger than a prison cell. "This is where you'll sleep," he said. "Your shift starts in 6 hours." The work was monotonous and grueling, but it kept me busy, kept my mind off the mess I had left behind. Yet, there was something about the place that didn't sit right with me. The other workers were tight-lipped, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. And then, there were the noises, the strange, unidentifiable sounds that echoed through the warehouse at night. One night, I was assigned to check the exterior lights. As I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a wall. The wind howled through the empty landscape, carrying with it an eerie sense of foreboding. As I walked the perimeter, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, a shadowy figure darting on all fours. My heart raced as I squinted into the darkness, but whatever it was disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I hurried back inside, my breath fogging up in the freezing air. When I mentioned it to Scar, he just smirked. "Welcome to the edge of the world," he said. "You'll get used to it, or you won't." As the polar night deepened, the unease in the warehouse grew. The workers began whispering about the creatures outside, about how they stayed away from the light but were always watching, always waiting. Scar handed me a gun one night, his expression grim. "In case the lights fail," he said. His words sent a chill down my spine. I began to realize that this wasn't just a place to disappear. It was a trap, a purgatory for those of us who had nowhere else to go. And as the days turned into weeks, I started to wonder if I would ever find a way out. Life was crumbling around me like an old, neglected building. My marriage, once full of laughter and stolen moments of joy, had turned into endless arguments and cold silences. At work, the factory felt like a ticking time bomb, and I was the guy holding the match. I knew one more mistake would cost me my job, and yet, instead of fixing things, I drowned myself in whiskey and regret. It was a Friday evening when I began my usual ritual, slipping into a dark bar, ordering that first drink that burned its way down my throat, and letting the alcohol fog my mind. It wasn't just about forgetting, it was about escaping. As the hours passed, I lost track of where I was or who I was with. The comforting hum of the bar turned into a blur of voices and laughter that seemed alien to me. The only thing I remember was the dim light of the bar and the sound of my own voice slurring as I ordered another round. Then, like someone flipping a switch, everything went dark. I woke up hours later, my body sprawled on the battered sofa in my living room, the taste of stale booze and regret bitter in my mouth. The morning was merciless. My head pounded with every beat of my heart, and the nausea churned in my stomach like a stormy sea. I groaned as I tried to sit up, only to feel a sharp pain shooting through my temples. The light streaming through the window was unforgiving, stabbing in my eyes like needles. For a moment, I considered lying back down and letting the hangover swallow me whole, but then I noticed the uneasy stillness in the room. I wasn't alone. Through the haze, I saw a figure standing near the TV, their outline blurry at first, but as my vision cleared, I recognized her, Mary Lynn. Her presence should have brought me comfort, but there was something in her posture, something rigid and distant, that filled me with a sense of dread. Her face, usually so expressive, was streaked with tears. She wasn't shouting, though. Instead, she was quiet, and that silence was more terrifying than any argument we ever had. I followed her gaze to the TV screen, where a news report was playing. My heart sank as I saw the images of a ransacked store, the smashed shelves, the broken glass, and the chaos. The reporter's voice was a dull buzz in my ears as I tried to piece together what I was seeing. The CCTV footage began to play, and there I was, disheveled, unrecognizable, but undeniably me. I stood in the center of the wreckage, my face twisted into something feral, my movements erratic. My stomach churned, not just from the hangover, but from the realization that I had done this. "I don't remember," I started to say, but my voice cracked under the weight of my guilt. Mary Lynn didn't respond immediately. She just turned away, her shoulders trembling with quiet sobs. When she finally spoke, her words were like a dagger. "Get out," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I can't do this anymore. I can't do you anymore." Her words echoed in my mind as I stumbled out of the house, clutching at my head as if I could hold the pieces of my shattered life together. I wandered aimlessly through the streets, the cold November air biting through my thin jacket. My thoughts were a chaotic mess of regret, fear, and desperation. I knew I couldn't go back, not to Mary Lynn, not to my job, not to the life I had ruined. At some point, I found myself at the bus station. The bright lights and the hum of activity felt surreal, like I was watching it all from outside my body. Without thinking, I bought a one-way ticket to the farthest destination I could afford. The bus ride was a blur of empty highways and unfamiliar towns. Each mile felt like a step further away from the man I used to be, and closer to the unknown. Days passed in a haze of bus rides and cheap motel rooms. I ran out of money quickly and resorted to hitchhiking, hoping to find a new beginning somewhere, anywhere. One driver, a grizzled man with a permanent scowl and a cigarette dangling from his lips, mentioned a place up north. "Barrow," he said, his voice gravelly. "They don't ask questions up there. If you're looking to disappear, that's your place." The idea was both terrifying and tempting. I didn't know what awaited me in Barrow, but I knew I couldn't keep drifting like this. The thought of starting fresh, of burying my past in the snow and darkness of the Arctic, was enough to keep me moving. Barrow wasn't the end of the road, but it was close. From there, I hitched another ride to a desolate outpost further north. The landscape was bleak and unforgiving, a vast expanse of snow and ice stretching as far as the eye could see. The cold was relentless, seeping into my bones no matter how many layers I wore. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, as four friends, Ayesha, Rehan, Sarah, and Allie, drove along a deserted road leading to the outskirts of the city. Excitement buzzed in the air. This was no ordinary outing. They had decided to explore the infamous Shadow Asylum, a derelict mental hospital that had been abandoned for decades. Stories about the asylum were the stuff of urban legends, patients disappearing, mysterious deaths, and the rumor of a nurse whose ghost wandered the halls. It was perfect for the group, who thrived on adrenaline-fueled adventures. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Sarah asked nervously, glancing at the crumbling silhouette of the asylum that loomed ahead. "Relax," Rian said with a grin, holding up his flashlight. "We'll be fine. It's just an old building. What's the worst that could happen?" The gates were rusted and bent, as if trying to keep intruders out or something inside. The group parked their car and climbed through a gap in the fence. The air was heavy, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. The main entrance was wide open, the large wooden doors hanging precariously on their hinges. Inside, the asylum was even more unsettling. Broken furniture, shattered windows, and graffiti covered the walls. Yet there was something more, a sense of foreboding, as though the building itself was watching them. "Creepy," Ali muttered, his usual bravado replaced by unease. Ayesha, the boldest of the group, led the way down a dark corridor. Her flashlight revealed long-forgotten patient files scattered on the floor. "This place must have been shut down in a hurry," she remarked. As they explored, a faint sound echoed through the hallways, soft crying, barely audible but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, clutching Ali's arm. "It's probably the wind," Rehan said, though his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. In one of the patient rooms, Rehan stumbled upon an old, dusty journal hidden under a pile of debris. The leather cover was worn, and the pages were brittle, but the writing inside was legible. "It's a diary," he announced, flipping through the pages. "Looks like it belonged to a patient named Miriam." The entries painted a horrifying picture. Miriam described how patients were subjected to cruel experiments, locked away in isolation and silenced if they dared to complain. One entry stood out. "She tried to help us. Nurse Eleanor was the only one who cared. But the director found out. He killed her. Now she haunts these halls, warning those who come too close to the truth." The group exchanged uneasy glances. A chill seemed to settle over the room. "We should leave," Sarah said firmly. "This isn't fun anymore." But before they could move, Ayesha gasped. "Did you see that?" "What?" Ali asked, spinning around. There, outside the window, a shadow. The group pressed on, despite Sarah's protests. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Doors creaked open on their own. Cold drafts blew through windowless rooms, and always there were the sounds, footsteps, whispers, and that eerie crying. In the basement, they discovered a hidden room. It was unlike the others, preserved as though frozen in time. Medical equipment, some of it blood-stained, lay scattered around. Shackles were bolted to the walls, and a single operating table stood in the center. "This is horrible," Ayesha said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rehan held up the journal. Miriam mentioned a secret room where the experiments happened. This must be it. Suddenly, the lights of their flashlights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. A cold, menacing voice whispered, "Leave." When the lights steadied, a figure stood in a corner, a translucent woman in a tattered nurse's uniform. Her eyes were hollow, her face etched with sorrow. "It's her," Ayesha said, trembling. "Nurse Eleanor." The ghost raised a finger to her lips, a gesture of warning. "You must go," she said, her voice echoing. "He knows you're here." Before the group could react, the door slammed shut. A deep, guttural laugh filled the room. The walls seemed to close in, and the ghost vanished. Panicking, the friends ran through the maze-like corridors, trying to find a way out. But the asylum had changed. Hallways stretched endlessly, looping back to where they started. "We're trapped," Ali said, his voice shaking. Then, without warning, Sarah screamed. They turned to find her gone, her flashlight lying abandoned on the floor. "Sarah," Ayesha shouted, but there was no response. Desperate to find their friend, the group retraced their steps to the hidden room. This time, they weren't alone. The ghost of the director, a towering figure in a blood-stained suit, stood before them. His eyes glowed with malice. "You should not have come," he growled. Rehan clutched the journal, flipping to the final entry. It described how the director's crimes were exposed but never punished, his spirit bound to the asylum as a guardian of its secrets. "We know what you did," Rehan said, his voice defiant. "You can't hide the truth." The director roared, lunging at them, but Nurse Eleanor reappeared, shielding the friends. A battle of spirits ensued, shaking the very foundation of the building. Amidst the chaos, the friends found an open door leading outside. They ran as the asylum began to collapse, its walls crumbling and ceilings caving in. But Sarah was still missing. As they reached the car, Rehan felt something heavy in his bag. He opened it to find the journal, though he had left it behind. A new entry had appeared, written in Sarah's handwriting. "I'm still here.